Hello again, boys and girls. Welcome back to Mr. Mousey Beyond the Silver Sea. This adventure with Mr. Mousey and Mr. Rabbit. And where have we got to? Well, we have got to this strange episode with the three soldiers standing still outside the city wall with the woodcart. Sergeant Hack sent out one of his soldiers. He brought back the woodcart, but the three soldiers wouldn't come. They just stood there. And who were these three soldiers? Well, anyway, Chapter 27, and it's called Andre. Hundreds of miles to the north, the man in the blue and black uniform had spent many days heading south on foot. The former domain of King Benny's was very much an empty place now, and had been for many years. As he walked, he thought over what he had seen in the past months. King Benny's had fought for the safety of his people, and for many years the wars against the plundering Discali had kept him away from the everyday business of running a country, and he depended on men of honour and valour like Andre DeVere to help protect and govern his kingdom. After the defeat, the land had fallen into lawlessness, while the people had lived in fear. Most had fled and scattered throughout other countries and islands in the Silvery Sea. Andre, for that is who this man we're speaking about was, had been the last man to see the king alive. He blamed himself for the king's death, and almost every night he relived those awful days in a recurring dream. In it, he was once again by the side of his king, fighting off a dozen men who had made a concentrated effort in the midst of battle to get to the king. Unseen by both of them, the wicked Discali prince Pilak had sneaked up and made a cowardly attack from behind. King Benez had had no chance. In his dream, Andre relived that moment, and because it was now a dream and he knew what was coming next, he tried time and time again to alter the events to prevent the murder. But it was to no avail. Every time, in his dream, the king would die, just as he had done on that fateful day. The following day, the news from home made things even darker. In an act of treachery, the Scally pirates had been alerted to the island where the king had hidden the royal princess, and in the middle of the night had overcome her guard and carried her away. Now, the sole heir to the throne was gone, and Andre felt that it was he who was to blame for it all. I vow this day to avenge His Highness, and to find the princess, he had promised to himself the following day. The fleet was scattered, and he was separated from his ship and his men, and so over the following weeks he had travelled on foot over desert and mountain in search of the princess. Eventually he had ended up back in the king's former lands to find them abandoned and empty. Wolves from the north roamed freely, and he had killed many before the remainder turned and fled from this warrior back to their safe bases in the hills. That the princess was not here, he was sure. Certainly Pilak was nowhere to be found, and finding him was very much still part of his plan. When he reached the sea, he would need to find a way of getting a ship, but that was still many miles distant, and he would deal with that problem when he got there. His true heart beat no fainter for all the disappointments he had had so far. I will serve as I have promised, he would say out aloud to the nightly campfires, and while I live, I will never give up until the wrong is righted. He had no idea how close he was to seeing this promise fulfilled. And so we go back to Scalador and chapter 28, and it's called Gelano. All that day Sergeant Hack festered in his room. No knock came to his door to inform him that the three standing in the plain had arrived, and bit by bit he became more and more unnerved. He had considered going to the tower to check who it was that he had imprisoned there, but he did not want anyone to see his uncertainty. The waiting was the worst. Who was standing out there? Why did they not fear him? What should he do? 1 more hour, he decided, and then I'll have them dragged in. Joanna kept returning to the window to look at the 3 figures standing in the heat of the day. This was something completely new to one who had so many days to study the comings and goings of the soldiers below. Suddenly she saw a quick movement from the gatehouse, and a lone figure marched out and marched over to the sentries on guard at the gate. One of them moved towards the tower and moved to speak to the single guard at the tower door. "I'm to what?" Sergeant Hack had marched over to the 4 guards on duty at the gate and ordered one to pass on his orders to the single tower guard. The order was what had caused the soldier at the tower to ask the question. "You mean I'm to leave the tower?" "That's what Hack said. Go and tell that waster on tower guard to come here." He tried to copy Hack's hated nasally voice. "But what about the tower? Who's to watch the prisoners?" "He didn't say. He just said to get you." The tower guard paused. What if it was a test of some kind? A trick to see if he would leave his post? What if he didn't go? He made a decision. "Right, I'll come. But if he's up to his tricks again, so help me, I'll get a report through to his superior officer." So it was that Joanna saw the guard from the tower go from 1 to 0. Things were definitely happening. Hack now had all his soldiers except the 3 he had thrown in the tower standing in front of him. There were 5 altogether, less than he would have liked, but then he only ever had 10 at one time, and 2 of them were on leave. "Right, you pathetic excuse for Discaladorian troops. If you mummy's boys are up to it, which you probably aren't." He looked at them with unhidden disdain. "Then we are going for a little walk." The soldiers looked at one another through the sides of their eyes. "And to make sure you big girls' blouses don't manage to get yourselves lost on the way, I shall be right behind you." "As far behind us as you can get," whispered the soldier who was farthest away from the sergeant and just out of earshot. "We shall be bringing in those 3 rebels who seem to think that the Discali Guard uniform is suitable for standing around like a scarecrow in, and they shall discover that Sergeant Hack's patience has long since passed. Then they will learn a lesson that none of you useless pieces of human refuse will forget in a hurry." And so, leaving the gatehouse and the tower totally unguarded against all the rules of city wall protection, he marched his men out across the plain to confront the 3 silent figures. The only thing that made the nervousness of the soldiers slightly easier was the satisfaction that their sergeant was even more afraid than they were. Anyone happening to be behind the North Gate house at that particular moment would have seen something very strange happen near the woodpile. The wood cart lay where it had been left, still full of logs, but now those logs began to move. First one, then another, dropped off the side of the cart, then half a dozen, and then suddenly a voice spoke. "It's okay. There's nobody about. Come on, we can get out now." Mr. Mousey was the first out, followed by Mr. Rabbit, and last of all, Nogger. "Oh, my back," moaned the rabbit. "Did we have to hide in there so long?" Nogger was rubbing his legs. He wasn't too sure if they were his legs or a couple of pieces of wood. "Sorry," said Mr. Mousey, "but we had to wait until it was safe to come out. I'm stiff myself." "Never mind stiff," replied his friend. "What about hungry?" "Right now, I think we'd better find the princess and get out of here," said the little mouse, looking around. "Look, there's the tower. Come on. The second part of our plan. Oh, yes, our plan. As if hiding in a wood cart all night with no food and a smelly beaver was anything to do with me. Mr. Rabbit actually said most of this under his breath, so no one made any reply. Sneaking from building to building, the three animals managed to make it to the tower in a short space of time. That there was no one on guard duty was surprising to them all, but it was no time to look at a gift horse in the mouth, so Mr. Mousey tried the handle. "It's locked," he said. At the same time he was thinking, now what? "Here, let me." Mr. Rabbit pushed his way forward. "I've seen this lots of times in books and stuff. You just run at the door and knock it down with your shoulder." Nogger, who was standing at the tower wall, went to say something, but Mr. Rabbit silenced him by backing away from the door and holding up his hand. "Watch," he said. "This is how us heroes do it." With that, he sprinted towards the door and crashed into it with all of his might. Well, as you might imagine, a door designed to keep big, strong, burly men safely locked in or out, as the case may be, will not be too impressed by the furry shoulder of a rabbit, even if it is a hero rabbit. This door didn't even seem to notice this particular shoulder at all. The shoulder of the rabbit, whose shoulder it was, however, noticed it very much indeed. The way he noticed it was spelt P-A-I-N. Pain, lots of it. "Ow, ow, 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 ow!" He jumped around, rubbing his shoulder, his eyes firmly shut. "Didn't it work then?" asked Nogger. "Not really," said Mr. Mousey. "Here, Mr. Rabbit, I think we'll have to think of something else." "That's not the way it was supposed to go, you know," said Mr. Rabbit, rubbing his shoulder furiously. "Would this here work?" said Nogger. Nogger was holding out a large iron key in his hand. "Where did you get that?" asked Mr. Mousey. We're just hanging here on this hook on the wall," he replied, pointing to a metal hook at the side of the door. "What?" cried Mr. Rabbit. "And you didn't tell me? Why didn't you say so?" "Sorry," said Nogger sheepishly. "Only he said as how heroes did it a different way." He seemed genuinely put out. The key, of course, fitted, and the door opened. Straight ahead, a flight of steps went up from the centre of the floor until it came to the far wall. Where it met the wall, the stairs turned right and went up, spiralling around the wall in a steep climb. The space below the stairs from the floor was taken up by a small under-the-stairs room, and a door was behind the stairs in a wall at the right side. "Quickly! We may not have much time until someone returns," said Mr. Mousey. "Nogger, you check under the stairs. Mr. Rabbit and I will check up the tower." With that, the mouse and the rabbit dived up the stairs while Nogger went over to the door behind the stairs. Meanwhile, outside, 5 Discali soldiers stood only a few feet from the 3 lone figures in the plain. They were unsure what next to do, so they stood awaiting orders from behind. Sergeant Hack's rough voice broke into the silence. "Well, don't just stand there staring, you idiots. Put them under arrest. And you needn't be too gentle about it either." After a moment's hesitation, all 5 stepped forward, 3 swords and 2 spears levelled at the silent 3. Back in the tower, Mr. Rabbit and Mr. Mousey had got to the top of the tower just about the same time as Nogger managed to break the lock on the door with his cutlass. Just as down below, Nogger was opening the door, the mouse and the rabbit stood before another one 200 feet higher. "Is there a key anywhere?" asked Mr. Rabbit, looking around. Sure enough, a key hung in a wooden box fixed to the wall to the right of the door. Turning the key, the door slowly opened inward to reveal a simply furnished room with a large window in one wall. Meanwhile, downstairs, "Is there anybody here?" asked Nogger downstairs. "Hello," said Mr. Mousey upstairs. "Princess Jelana?" What Mr. Mousey and Mr. Rabbit then discovered was very different to what Nogger had discovered downstairs. Nogger had entered a darkened room, stale smelling and damp, when he suddenly found himself facing three Discallies. He had not expected seeing anyone, let alone three semi-dressed soldiers, and his first reaction was to lift his cutlass, ready to fight. Now, had his eyesight been better, he would have seen the terror on their faces as they looked up and saw a raised weapon and believed in their hearts they were about to be executed. In fear, they leapt to their feet and rushed by Nogger, who was too surprised to do much else than to take a swipe at them and miss. Mr. Mousey had wisely shut the tower door behind them in case anyone noticed outside, and so the three Discalli prisoners must have thought it was locked, for they simply promptly turned, and fled screaming up the staircase. Upstairs, Mr. Mousey and Mr. Rabbit saw a slim figure pressed with her back to the wall. Her eyes were large and uncertain as she looked at the two with growing amazement. "Hello, Princess Jelana. This is Mr. Rabbit, and I'm Mr. Mousey, and you won't know us, but we've come to rescue you." Mr. Rabbit stood with his mouth wide open, looking at the vision before him. "I think I'm in love," he said. Before anyone had a chance to say any more, the sound of screaming came through the open door. Taking a few steps across the stone floor, Mr. Mousey gently took the princess's hand. "Quickly, let's go." Meanwhile, outside, "What do you mean, stuffed dummies?" screamed a furious hack. He stepped over to kick at the three soldiers, who were now a mass of sticks, grass, and empty uniforms on the ground. "We've been afraid of nothing more than three stuffed suits," said a soldier to his fellow, nodding his head in disbelief. "You absolute fools!" screamed Hack. "You dragged me out of here to play with the only things in the world as thick as yourselves." He was getting louder as his wrath increased. "But sir," said one of the soldiers quickly, "how could dummies have wheeled the wood cart out here?" Sergeant Hack suddenly stopped as something dawned on him. "The wood cart!" he repeated. Mr. Rabbit led the way, followed by Mr. Mousey, guiding the dumbfounded princess. Who were these two? How did they know her? Something told her, however, to trust and not fear. As they passed through a door on the way down, three Discalli soldiers suddenly appeared in full flight, rushing straight at them on the way up. Mr. Rabbit had just got his mouth open and was beginning to give a good shout himself when it dawned on him he had seen these three before. Without pausing, the three pushed by, intent on escape and nothing else. "We'll have to stop meeting like this," called Mr. Rabbit after the figures as they disappeared on up the stairs. Giving his head a quick shake, the rabbit turned and led their way down through the tower. Princess Jelana by now was utterly confused and had decided just to go along with events. "Quickly, back to the city!" cried Sergeant Hack. "You two, check the tower. The rest, follow me to the gatehouse." All six set off at a run towards the gate. Hack was hoping that his fears would prove groundless. But if his hunch was right... "Faster, you fools!" he cried. Just as Hack and his men were almost at the gate, Mr. Rabbit, Mr. Mousey, and the princess met Nogger at the base of the stairs. "Did he just see—" began Nogger. "No time to explain," called Mr. Mousey. "Come on, quick, follow us." As they burst out of the tower door, Mr. Mousey caught a glimpse of the soldiers arriving at the gate. "This way," he called in a loud whisper, turning left and running round the back of the tower. Once around the back, Mr. Rabbit spoke quietly into his friend's ear. "I'm sure it must be my turn now to hold the princess's hand." Sergeant Hack's heart fell as he looked across and saw the empty wood cart. Just as he was considering what to do, one of the soldiers sent to check the tower came panting before him. The tower! The tower, sir! The door's open!" Well, perhaps Sergeant Hack would have left a guard at the gate and things might have turned out differently, except at that moment a shout came up high at the tower window. Looking up, he saw figures moving around. "They're in the tower! Everyone! Everyone to the tower! Enemy in the tower!" Not wanting to argue, all the guards rushed to the tower and joined the sergeant at the open door. A cry came down the spiral stairs. "Right! There'll be no escape this time," said Sergeant Hack in a voice like sandpaper. "I'll find out who thinks he can mess around with me and get away with it." He pushed his men roughly up the stairs, and he followed, running, his sword drawn. The three animals and the princess reached the gatehouse and slowed as Mr. Mousey ran ahead and checked the gate. There was no guard at all. He motioned with his hand, and the others sped towards him at the entrance in the wall. Mr. Rabbit was holding the princess's hand, and he had a silly smile on his face. "Run now! Run!" cried Mr. Mousey as they drew close. Without needing to be told twice, they dashed for the gate and were soon out in the open, running across the open ground for the forest beyond. Hack and his men burst into the room at the top of the tower, swords drawn. Cringing up against the wall beside the window, the three prisoners shook as they saw Hack enter behind their colleagues. "You? What are you useless excuses for soldiers doing here? And where is the girl?" His voice was high with rage and anger. Just as things seemed bad for him, they had suddenly got worse. The imprisonment of the princess was his responsibility, and he would be the one who would suffer if she had escaped. He strode across the room in rapid steps, waving his sword about in the most alarming manner and threatening horrible things to all in the room. As he approached the window, his eyes caught a movement outside and beyond the city wall, far below. "Who is that out there? Who is not here?" he hurled. The soldiers in the room gave blank looks and shook their heads. "It's her! You absolute fools! The princess is escaping!" As Hack and his men clattered wildly back down the stairs, Mr. Mousey was urging with the utmost speed. "Not far. Come on, Nogger. We're nearly there." Nogger was finding it hard going and was lagging behind. The princess was running with ease beside Mr. Rabbit, who was trying not to look puffed out beside her, as he kept what he imagined to be a very attractive grin on his face. Just as they were within a few paces of the trees, a bell began to ring from the direction of the city. "What now?" wondered Mr. Mousey as he and Nogger reached the tree line behind the other two. One of the soldiers was pealing the alarm bell on the roof of the gatehouse. It was the signal to the city garrison and was used in times of attack on the wall. As the slow, steady dongs echoed through the streets, commanders in other sectors of the city roused their men. Within minutes, hundreds of soldiers would be rallying to the call, fully armed and ready for a fight. Sergeant Hack had not wanted to sound the alarm, but he knew he had no other choice. If his prisoner escaped, he would be executed. It was his only chance to save his skin. Soon the sound of men's voices and the clash of armour could be heard, rushing towards the north gate, and Sergeant Hack was soon having to admit the breakout. The four were taking a brief breather, while unknown to them an army assembled to hunt them down. Mr. Rabbit was talking to the princess, who was trying not to laugh at the funny creature before her. She hadn't had reason to laugh in a long time, and she felt exhilarated just to be out in the open again. "So, you've never actually kissed a frog, even though you are a princess?" asked Mr. Rabbit. "Well, no, I've never really had the opportunity," said Princess Jelana politely. "What about a rabbit then? Have you ever kissed one of them?" Mr. Mousey could see it was time to interrupt. "Pardon me, Princess. Mr. Rabbit, we need to get going," he said, trying to catch his friend with a sort of try-to-be-good look. "Oh, don't you think we could rest here for a while? I mean, it's not as if anyone has caught on yet," said Mr. Rabbit, who meantime was thinking furiously of another good excuse to take the princess's hand again. Just then Nogger spoke up. He had been resting with his back to a tree, peering back towards the city. "Is it just me, or does I see something happening over at yonder place we has just run away from?" They all turned, and as they looked back towards the city, their hearts chilled. Like swarms of black ants, hundreds of soldiers were pouring out through the north gate into the plain and making fast straight for them. Right, chase is on. They've escaped, but for how long? Will the soldiers catch them? Well, we'll need to come to the next chapter to find out. Thanks, boys and girls, for listening. Hope you're enjoying the story, and you take care. Until next time, God bless.